All right, prayer requests. Getting close. There you go. There you go. I'll try not. I will try not to. Still no news. Yeah, we'll keep praying for Philip and Lucretia and all that. Yeah. Pray for my folks are traveling. I think they're actually up there already. So up to Iowa. We got a wedding this weekend for my cousin, and then I'm gonna Friday be meeting with where we're doing the mission trip. So just pray that that goes well for us to get all that planned out. Hope to do that Friday and get all that worked out so that doesn't crowd into the rest of the weekend. But anyway, we'll figure all that out when we get there. Looks like a lot of work to be able to do with that camp there, but we're supposed to meet with. I'm supposed to meet with them Friday. So just pray for that all that goes well. Talked to Belinda today. She's going in. They have figured out that her pacemaker basically is run its course, gone, and so she's getting a new one put in on Tuesday. So they were hoping to do it Friday, but the cardiologist was out until I think Tuesday. So the plan is right now for her to have that surgery on Tuesday. So just remember her in prayer. And then Anne her arm has not healed the way that they were hoping. So anyway, so we just prayer for her is just that her arm starts to heal and everything else in relation to that. So I honestly haven't talked to them to see if it doesn't, what they could even do. But anyway, I don't know that. But they're just praying that it heals on its own and everything else. So.
Keep praying for Amy and John and Craig. She's been coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a huge praise.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we take that for granted, don't we? Yeah, take that for granted.
This is not as much a need as the ones we heard, but Reese's got to take her DAC test this summer. That's to get into medical school, and the higher the grade, the better chances are getting in. So I said she needed to study for a month straight before she even took the test. So it's being prayer for that. She's home right now, but she told him she's going back to Oklahoma because she couldn't study with them. So
Yeah.
she may have to go all the way back to Oklahoma
Yeah,
to study.
yeah, try and get.
Just so it'd be peace and quiet.
Yeah, that's a polite way of saying you're bothering me.
I guess she's got used to it on her own.
That's a polite way for a teenager to say you're bothering me. I'm going back to school.
She's got a cat that she's been carrying to school with her since she got her apartment. And the cat, when he comes in, it don't have nothing to do with anything. And I said, well, that cat done went to Oklahoma and got hide and flu. And I said, Dad, I think she's getting it.
Yeah, huh? There you go. There you go. For sure. Anybody else?
Our kid's getting out of school, graduation Friday night.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to also remember Heather Osborne.
Yes.
I don't know.
I asked you about that.
Yeah.
What did they find out?
So she had a tumor that they found. I don't remember which organ it was in. They found a tumor, and it was attached and putting pressure on everything else around it and whatnot. So anyway, between that and then I think from all of that, she was in the hospital and not open her eyes, but she was able to still communicate and whatnot, but was not doing it very well. And so she's got a lot of complications in relation to, everything. So.
She's lost her dad, and her mother's just deserted her, so she's pretty much on her own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You were saying that? Do you remember did they say that they'd removed the tumor yet or not? Do you remember? Don't remember. Yeah. 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 So, just need to remember them in prayer for sure.
You know, she lost her dad.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. Dave, would you lead us in prayer? Amen. All right, 2 Kings 8. Second Kings 8, verse 1. Elisha spoke to the woman whose son he had restored to life, saying, Arise and go with your household and sojourn wherever you can sojourn, for the Lord has called for a famine, and it will even come on the land for 7 years. One of the things that we've already said about Elisha is that the way that God works with Elisha is it almost feels erratic in that a lot of the miracles and the things that he performs through him it's hard to find just a consistent pattern. But one of the things that always comes to the surface with him is what God shows him in terms of foreseeing things that's going to happen, and things that God holds back from him seeing that's going to happen, and how God uses that in real time. So one of the things that you see with Elisha is the timing of events, and you also then see God giving him foresight into see the future of what's going to happen, and then times in which he doesn't, and he specifically does both of those things. One of the things that should bring us to, in terms of just learning experience, is learning to trust God in the things that he shows us, that we pray for him to give us wisdom for the things that we do not yet see, and also to have enough foresight to the things that we should see and want to see and need to see, but also trust him in the things that we didn't see. Okay? Because there's a lot of times in our lives where you won't necessarily see something coming, and you will really seek to evaluate yourself just in relation. Well, did I miss it? Did I miss it? Did I miss it? Well, a lot of times you see with Elisha, God didn't show him certain things, and he had specific reasons on why he didn't show him certain things. Just remember that when God doesn't show you some of those things that you're asking to see, it gives you the opportunity to trust God in ways that you couldn't otherwise. So instead of, one of the things it teaches us, instead of getting so caught up in that, it's just growth in trusting God, both what he shows you, but also what he holds back from you as well. Here, he's taking this woman whose son had died, that he used Elisha to bring back to life, and he tells her that there's going to be a famine in the land for 7 years, and he tells her to leave. Here's the other thing that comes up a lot, probably not necessarily in this group, but you probably have had it throughout your life. Should I stay or should I go? Or should I stay or should I go? Should I stay or should I go? What should I do? What should I do? What should I do? There's times in which we saw this with Abraham. God says, get up and go. And then he says to his son Isaac, stay where you're at. And sometimes people will say, well, for example, like with Jacob, well, he shouldn't have left. He should have never left. He shouldn't have never left. But you see countless examples of where God told and forewarned others to say, get up and go. So the question a lot of times is, what is it that I should do in relation to the current state that I find myself in? And the answer to that is, it's not necessarily circumstantial based. In other words, you can't determine if there's a famine in your life whether or not that necessarily in and of itself means that you should stay or you should go. Does that make sense? It's God's direction in the midst of those circumstances that is what you're looking for, and whether that is for you to stay or for whether that means for you to go, either way, you're still needing to trust Him through all of that. There's an exorbitant amount of risk for this lady and her family for her to go as well. It's just different than a famine that's actually in the land. Okay? So it's a weird... This is kind of it's sort of typical for Elisha because it's kind of a weird miracle. It's like the axe head. Okay, what's a prophet doing raising an axe head up? Well, here he's forewarning this woman and her family who he's already had a miracle through for her to flee the land. But that's not the end of the story. So he tells her to flee the land because there's a 7-year famine, and just go find a place where you can make it, in essence, to be able to be taken care of. And so the woman arose and did according to the word of the man of God. So what does she do? That's the question. She trusts the word of God in what God has told her to do. Okay? And that's the bottom line. She trusts the word of God. So it's not, should I stay, should I go? What is it that I have a sense of direction from God in relation to what I should do, moving forward, feeling the hand and providence of God in carrying that out, and ultimately, either way, I'm trusting Him in relation to this. One of the things that you've got to ask yourself is God a good communicator? And the answer to that is yes, He is. So if God is not, for lack of a better term, communicating to you, trust Him that there's good reason why He's not. Okay? Just trust Him that there's good reason why He's not. And just because He's not now does not mean that He's not ever. Yes, it's a time for self-reflection and all those things, but I'm not holding that it's dependent upon man for God to be able to communicate to Him. Because here's what I'm holding. If it's dependent upon man, if it's dependent upon us to enact within ourselves the righteousness for God to communicate to us, we're toast. We're toast. So either way, the thing that you got to remember is we are holding and trusting that God is the one who's going to be able to communicate and move us forward. And if in this God is showing us some things in our own lives that need to change, fair enough. Fair enough. There's nothing wrong with that. But ultimately, in either boat, we're still depending upon God and trusting in God in relation to what He's doing. So she heeds the word of God, and therefore she goes, trusting that God's going to take care of her for these 7 years. Right? So she went out, she went with her household, sojourned in the land of the Philistines 7 years. At the end of 7 years, the woman returned from the land of the Philistines, and she went out to appeal to the king for her house and for her field. So when she leaves, guess what? She loses all of her home and all of her land. Now, the implication of this is that it's family land. What do we know about family land as it relates to Israel? What's supposed to happen with family land? It's supposed to stay in the family. Yeah, it's supposed to stay in the family, right? And that's a part of that covenantal promise. But what's the problem? She's got two problems. What's the two problems that she has? The first one, she left, and what's the second one? Yes, 7 years. So you've got a 49-year jubilee, so it would catch up in relation to that. Technically, by depending upon what year it is, she may still have time to wait. That's actually, so I could put 3 things in there. So she may have some more time and distance to wait on there. What's the third problem that she's got? Okay. So let's focus on she has no way to buy it back. She may have the means, but society, what's her society status? Widow, and we believe in biology in this, right here, right now, right? So, and what? And female. So her social status is she's invulnerable, yeah, in relation to that. So she's vulnerable, and then on top of that, even more vulnerable. Okay. Question? Thought? Yeah. So,
She's exactly what the Israelites themselves saw needed protection. She's the classic example of someone that all Israel, despite what they were, what they became, all Israel decided that they should be protected.
yes. So God cares for pure and holy righteousness before God is to take care of widows and orphans. The essence of that is those who are vulnerable in relation to that. The ironic thing that's going on here is we know because we studied it, we know what is a part of the Abrahamic covenant, and failure in relation to the Abrahamic covenant brings what? What's the discipline that they know they're not in good relationship with God? God's a good communicator, and with the Abrahamic covenant, what's one way they know they're not in good relationship with God as a whole? What happens to the land? Famine. So the state, see, so the famine shows you in the physical what's going on in the spiritual. So then the question comes in for us would be, if we don't know the story, well, if Israel is in spiritual apostasy, what is it who is it, again, the most risk? They should be taking care of her, but what's the odds that they're going to? What's the odds that they're going to care to give her land back to her? It's not good. It's not good. So Elisha tells her to leave. She trusts God and leaves, but when she comes back, everything that she had is gone. So she's going to make an appeal to the king in relation to get it back. But oh, by the way, are the kings of Israel righteous or wicked? So what are the odds the king's going to give her land? If God doesn't intervene, she ain't going to get it. I'm just tell you right now. She's just not going to get it. So she returns, went out to appeal to the king for her house and her field. The king was talking with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, saying, "Please relate to me all the great things that Elisha has done." Now this is probably pre-leper Gehazi, okay? Because remember, we're not speaking in chronological order necessarily in terms of the record. So it's probably pre-leper Gehazi, probably. So King's talking to Gehazi saying, "Hey, tell me about Elisha and everything that's happening with Elisha. What's all God doing with Elisha?" So the king is having this conversation with Elisha's messenger, and he says, "Relate to me all the great things that he's done." He was relating to the king how he restored to life the one who was dead. So Gehazi is telling the story of this woman and this boy, and how that God used Elisha to raise this boy of this particular woman. He's talking to the king about that. So as he was relating to the king how he had restored the one, behold, anytime you see behold, you should highlight it or circle it. Because behold is like, holy smokes. That's what behold is. Behold is holy smokes. There's other words for it, but for our sake, it's holy smokes. So don't pass by behold. It's like holy smokes. While he's talking to her about this story, the woman whose son had restored to life comes in, appeals to the king for her and her field. And Gehazi says, "My lord, O king, this is the woman and her son, whom Elisha restored to life." Imagine if somebody's telling you, like, a legitimate, miraculous story that you cannot believe after you'd heard about it. You've heard about a lot of stuff, and so you've asked him about it, and he's relating it to you, and it just so happens that that woman and her son walked through the door. Blind, dumb luck. Blind, dumb luck. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, it shows us that with God there is no coincidences. Yeah. So he says, it's her. It's her. And that's the boy. That's the boy who was dead, who's now walking into your palace. So this gets the king's attention. So the king asked the woman, and she related it to him. So the king looks at her and says, tell me more. Did this actually happen? And what you can imagine, right? What was the deal? Was he sick? Had he been sick for a while? How do you know was he really dead? He was dead for how long? Elisha did what? And brought him down, and then he ate? I mean, now all of a sudden you go from secondhand information to she and he is right there. Living proof of what God did through Elisha. Blind, dumb luck. So when the king asked the woman, she related it to him, verse 6. So the king appointed for her a certain officer, saying, restore all that is hers, and all the produce of the field from the day that she left even until now. Now, that may not necessarily seem, it actually does seem like a big deal in normal times, but think about how big of a deal it was in famine times. Here's what is so incredible about this story and about God. With God, God can send you on a 7-year Sabbath, and you guys know that I'm not a prosperity preacher, okay, right? We all have got that, right? Make sure we get that on record. But God can put you on a 7-year Sabbath, and when you come out of that 7-year Sabbath of rest, give you all that you feel like you lost and then some. Now this is not a prosperity message by any stretch of the imagination in relation to that. But the Sabbath was saying, when people ask me about the Sabbath, and people ask me about tithing, and people ask me about all of this, the Sabbath is about a person's availability and willingness to trust God in their rest. That you can actually, when you are in rest, in worship of God, provided for better than if you don't. And that is anti-human nature. It is a constant battle. Because our belief is, if it's going to happen, we have to do it. We have to make it happen. Right? We have a tendency to move to desperation. I think I said this Sunday. We have a tendency to move to desperation instead of being diligent. And in our diligence, we continually are trusting God. It's the principle of tithe. It's the principle of Sabbath. It's the principle of you can trust God in these things that God institutes, because it's God who is our provider, not ourselves. So a woman who is of in the culture lower status, vulnerable, is told to flee, leaves her land, leaves her home, and when we come back, we find that it's not hers. We don't know why, and why doesn't matter. It's not hers, but she's got to go to the king to appeal for it. And oh, by the way, this is not a good king. This is not a good king. This is a king who loves to hear about the stories of God and the miracles of God, but is not a worshiper of this God. And then all of a sudden, while he's asking Elisha's messenger about this specific incident, or actually the messenger just brings it up, this specific incident, it just so happens that she walks through the door, which piques his interest more. She tells it firsthand, and he says, don't just give her land, give her everything that land produced for the last 7 years. Money aside, okay, money aside. Money is just, it's a economic tool. Okay, it's just an economic tool. Money aside, you and I can trust God to provide and care in ways that we cannot foresee. Now, we will always have in our mind how this can work out because we're Jacob. God's promised me this. The only thing is he really needs my help because I figured out how this can work out, and that's Jacob, you know. So the vote is God plus one, and I'm the one. No, you can trust God in his way that oftentimes doesn't make sense in our thinking, and yet we continually find that God takes care of his own. God takes care of his own. Now, our promise is not that all of that's going to be received or even that some of it's going to be received in this life, but it's promised for eternity. Now, here's the thing. How does God get a Christian to trust his life into eternity? It's a question you've got to ask. How is it that God gets a Christian to trust his life into eternity? And you know what the answer is? He gives you those same tastes in this life. In other words, God shows himself faithful enough in this life for delayed gratification and a delayed providence where God shows himself faithful in ways that you didn't see before it happened in this life that gives you enough to say, if he can do it in this life in that small way, why wouldn't I think and believe that he can do it for all of eternity in the next life? See, he's shown a pattern of behavior that says I can trust him with my life eternal because he's shown me in this life that he is trustworthy. Does that make sense? So that's where it's really unfortunate where prosperity gospel totally misses it, because prosperity gospel basically says in some way, shape, form, or fashion, he's going to give it to me, he's going to give it to me now. There's so many things wrong with it, we don't have time. You know, there's just so many. How does a person even think that would be considered a blessing because you're comparing a vapor to a driving rain? So because God would give you prosperity in a vapor that's gone in a breath, you should have joy and happiness and everything else because God's given you this? And not be thinking about the eternal treasures? The whole thing is just skewed. It's just the whole thing is just skewed. It's the very thing that pulls a person away from God, not to God. So it's an incredible thing. And then we get weird. We get weird. Did y'all know what do they call it is it wet boarding that they ban now in interrogation, you know, where they get the rag and they wet the rag and they put it over or they put the head in the bucket, and all that kind of stuff. We've got like wet boarding that's fixing to go on here in relation to a king. So Elisha came to Damascus. Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, was sick. It was told him, saying, "The man of God has come here." Now remember, Aram is not, in